going to go through the rest of our blend modes that we have available in Photoshop. So let's take a look here. We will go to this section, which is our contrasting blending modes. If we go to overlay, we can see that this blend mode doesn't just lighten or darken like these other sections did, but it'll both lighten and darken depending on which areas of our image are above 50% gray in value and which areas are darker than 50% gray in value. So here we have 50% gray. This, with our overlay blend mode turned on, does not affect the image in any way. Where it's darker than 50% gray, we have a darkening effect. Where it's brighter than 50% gray, we have a lightening effect. And that is why this is called a contrast blending mode, because it both lightens and darkens areas of your image. After overlay, we have soft light. This does the same thing, just with less intensity. And then we have hard light. Hard light does the same thing, but with more intensity. These areas that were fully black or white become fully black and white on the image beneath. After hard light, we have vivid light. Vivid light is like hard light, but it adds some contrast to the luminance values. Then we have linear light. Linear light is like hard light, but it adds saturation to your image. As you can see here, when we go to linear light, there's saturation added to the image below. Then we have pin light. Pin light won't affect your midtones as much, but it will affect your blacks and whites in a more extreme way. So we go to hard light, we can see that the midtones in pin light aren't as affected here, but the whites and blacks are strongly affected. Remember, these are our midtones, these are our lights, these are our darks. And lastly, in this section, we have hard mix. Hard mix adds the RGB values from your blend layer to your base layer. So you get this crazy psychedelic looking thing. This can also be affected by the fill. You can see this affects the intensity of the effect, and this keeps the intensity of the effect, but decreases how visible the whole layer is. Our next section contains our inversion and cancellation blend modes. If we go to difference, we can see that between these two images, we see the difference. So where there's black, you won't see a change, but where there's white, you will see a complete inversion of the image. If I went to my base layer and clicked Control-I to invert it, it is the exact same effect as applying white with a difference blending mode on top of that image. Then we have exclusion. Exclusion is just like difference, except areas that are 50% gray will stay 50% gray. Then we have subtract. Subtract will darken our image where there is lightness. So you see from this area where there's white, it turns into complete black. We can see along this gradient that where there's black, it stays black. Where it becomes whiter, it is darkened. And then divide does the opposite. It'll lighten our image based on areas of our blend layer that are darker. So here we have black, it turns this area white, and here where there's black on our gradient, it'll lighten this part of the image. And lastly, we have our hue, saturation, color, and luminosity blend modes. These blend modes deal with the colors. So let's go to hue. You can see that where there was black and white values with no hue, our image beneath becomes a grayscale image. Where we do have colors from our blended image, those hue values are then applied to the image below without affecting the saturation or luminance values of that area of the image. Saturation will do the same thing, but instead of changing the hue value, it'll keep the hue and change the saturation to the blended image's saturation. So this area is super saturated. When we have saturation blend mode and turn this base layer on, these areas stay the same hue, pink and green here, but the saturation is brought way up. Then we have color. Color will affect the saturation and hue together. So here it looks much more similar to this because it's affecting both the saturation and the hue without touching the luminance values. And lastly, we have luminosity. You can see these areas of the building keeps the same saturation and hue values, but the areas that define it, like the darks and the whites that give definition to the building, are washed out because this area doesn't have strong luminance values. So those are all of our blend modes. We've gone through all 27, and we will not use all 27 blend modes in the class, but we will use certain blend modes extensively. I've highlighted which ones those are on the download, so you can see which ones we'll use the most and which ones are the most important for you to remember. The last thing I'd like to show you in this section is that you can actually use blend modes with tools themselves, and the tool will use that blend mode as it works. So to demonstrate this, I'll select my blend layer, and with my brush tool, I can paint across and just have a normal streak of red because red is my selected color. If I went to the top here, I can see where it says mode. I can change the blend mode of the brush as I paint. So if I went to difference and then painted again, it is using the difference blend mode with this color of paint as I apply it. The problem with using blend modes directly on a layer with a tool is that it's called destructive editing. You can't go back and undo it. If I save the document and I wanted to change the blend mode of this area or something like that, I couldn't just go change that because that's how I had saved my document. What I will always do is add a new layer, paint in a normal blend mode, but change the blend mode of the layer to whatever I want. It'll create the same effect, but then I could go back and select my eraser tool and make changes to this. So let's say I wanted the effect to stop there. I can adjust this layer without actually making any changes to the layer beneath it. So they're treated as two separate things. If I had painted directly on that layer, there's just one layer and I can't adjust as specifically once I've made changes. Now I'd also like to show you how you can use opacity and fill to affect layer styles. If I go to this layer and double click it, I will bring up my layer styles box. And here I have all my options for layer styles. If I click on inner shadow, I'll apply that. I have that effect on my layer now. If I bring down the opacity of my layer, it'll affect the layer information and the layer style. So I bring it to 0, it's completely transparent. If I brought down the fill on this layer, it would bring down the layer information without affecting the layer style, so my drop shadow is still there. This can be useful in a few key ways when you're compositing images, so I just wanted to show you that right now.